Hello and good evening. Welcome to ADA. ADA stands for Art-Desire-Activism and is a flagship series here at the Center of Studies in Gender and Sexuality that encourages conversations on gender, sexuality, desire, identity, and so on through art and performance and with art makers, thinkers, and practitioners. Today, we have with us two stalwarts who have influenced not just the form, but also the dialogue around theater and visual art, and especially the ways in which these practices have spoken about gender, about bodies, about the times we live in, its ethos and enigma. It's a great pleasure and honor to have with us Anuradha Kapur and Nilima Sheikh. I'll just quickly introduce both of them. Anuradha Kapur is a theatre director and scholar. She taught at the National School of Drama for over 3 decades and was its director for 6 years. She currently teaches performance studies at Ambedkar University, Delhi. Anuradha is the recipient of the coveted Sangeet Natak Academy Award. Among her many productions are versions of Tagore's Gora, Umrao, a version of Muhammad Hadi Ruswa's novel Umrao Jan Ada, and designed by Nilima Sheikh. Sundari, an actor prepares, about which you will hear shortly. She also jointly directed the Antigone project in 2003 with Ayan Lal, Dark Things in 2018 with Deepan Sivaraman, and most recently Daughters in the year 2020. Welcome, Anuradha. Nilima Sheikh is a visual artist. Since the mid-80s, Sheikh has done extensive research about traditional art forms in India, advocated for the sustainability of the practice of traditional painters, and used a wide range of visual and literary sources in her work. Over her 50-year career, the Baroda-based artist has woven into her work her concerns with femininity, violence, and national politics. Among her solo exhibitions include Terrain, Carrying a Cross at Documenta 14, which is historically one of the world's most important exhibitions that takes place in Germany every 5 years. The Country Without a Post Office, 2003, Each Night Put Kashmir in Yours, 2010, and her works have been part of public exhibitions, including the Art Institute of Chicago. Welcome, both of you. We will begin shortly. Before that, just to let you know that you can keep posting your questions using the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen. And my colleague Shresh will come in the last 30 to 40 minutes during the session to ask these questions to our panelists today. Yeah. So now I'll quickly show you a short trailer of the film that is based around the production Sundari, an actor prepares.
हमारे घर के कोने में मेरे दादा त्रिभुवन दास के स्वर तानपुरे के साथ खुलते हुए स्मरण हो आते हैं.
I suppose जैसे हम अभी इनसे देख के सुंदरी को वापस जा रहे हैं, सुंदरी must have seen these and made himself. Hey Nal! Hey Nal! रोई रोई रातियां खड़ी.
कब रात हो, कब नाटक देखने को मिले, इस आशा से मेरा मन मानो पंख लगा के उड़ जाता. तात्कारी दुईता विनाशा बल जा कपूंची को न तुला कसरा का जुमंतना.
This is not just Ravi Verma as a single painter at that time, but this is a painting of that time, of that ethos.
और अब लग रहा है कि मैं स्त्री ही हूँ.
Thank you, Neil. And thank you for setting up this dialogue. between Nilima and myself. Actually, the dialogue involves many people, including Madhushri Datta, whose film trailer you've seen and whose film clips we will try to show you while we talk. But it's a great pleasure to be here. And as you said, it's an artist conversation. So it's a conversation that Nilima and myself have had over many, many years and over many productions. So it's also a very special occasion to remember these works, even while we talk about one, but it is a kind of bonding and friendship about how theater is possible and how collaborations are possible. So thank you, Neil, for setting this up. And thank you for setting up a kind of conversation that I think we as practitioners value, and I hope we can communicate some of the things that we thought about in Sundari. Let me just start by bringing the details of Sundari in front of you. The film clips that you will see and the trailer that you saw is part of Madhushri Datta's documentary of the Sundari production, which was filmed in the Sri Ram Center where the performances happened in 1997. The whole production was a series of collaborations. The text, based on Jayshankar Sundari auto/biography, and I'll explain why I put the slash there, was adapted and made into a performing text by Gitanjali Shri, the distinguished novelist, and Dinesh Khanna. Obviously, the visual design was conceptualized by Nilima Sheikh and Bhupen Khakhar. The music that we used, which was a series of citations from Kumar Gandharv singing Marathi Natya Sangeet, which is akin to Gujarati Natya Sangeet, was done by Vidya Rao. And she also used very surprising details about the kind of music which makes a connection with the audience. So bringing in a wonderful, surprising Meera Pad by Reba Muburi. These were the details. The production was rehearsed over 3 months and then opened in the Sri Ram Center. Then it traveled a fair amount in India, and it was interesting to travel because it is based on the grammar of traveling in the Parsi theatre. So we were traveling by train with all the curtains and including something that Nilima will talk about, a paper swan, which had to be kept very carefully in the train. Why this project began in the 1990s is because a whole series of women directors at that time, my generation and younger, were interested in female impersonation. So Neelam Man Singh Chaudhary, Amala Lana, Tripurari Sharma, all working with the problematic of female impersonation, because female impersonation is, as we know, an honored tradition that still exists through many forms, from the Nakals in Punjab to the Ramlila in Ramnagar to Kuchipudi. All kinds of grammars use female impersonation today, but the stardom attached to female impersonation comes via the Parsi theatre. I'll come back to that. So women directors were interested at that time to see how the body of the woman may be figured on stage, about its figuration. I'm using a word which I know Nilima uses and we all learned in the theatre to use. We often say we don't use figuration quite that much, but I think the meaning is akin to that, because figuration in how to make the body of a contemporary woman, is it developed by convention? Is it habit? Is it how is the body made, which is as much a part of a pedagogical exercise as it is of a historical exercise. And I quote one of my favorite quotations about figuration of women, and I quote it everywhere, so I'm sure some of you might even have heard it. And it's Gail Austen talking about the figuration of women in the theatre. She says, it's well known that the emperor has no clothes, but the empress has no body. And that's where we actually begin by thinking, what is the body to figure for a woman performer. And then, therefore, the interest in looking at a form that both essentializes the woman as well as makes it, the image of the woman, mobile and open to question, to contestation, to being able to put in front of one the fact that it is a series of historically, conventionally defined gestures. So it both essentializes the woman, the female impersonator, and mobilizes the category. And because of that, I think many women directors started working with this form. So Sundari and Actors Prepares is a kind of dialogue of that order that started in the 1990s and it continues till today. So it's an enduring interest in how to build the character of a woman on stage. For us, when we started, when I come to that in a minute, Sundari's career is over 30 years. So he started when he was 9, and he then finished working when he was a middle-aged man. But he was still working doing major roles as a woman. So the scale of that journey, we were able to decide to do 3 Sundaris, one as a young boy, one as a youthful man, and one as a middle-aged man, where each of the visage actually brings in both age, and then when you're a middle-aged man, actually maybe even erases the how shall I say, the markers of gender differentiation. As we know, the markers of differentiation change as you age. So the 3 figures, and you will see them, I hope, if we are able to show you the clips, of the 3 always arriving together. So it's like you see the span, the journey of Sundari. Let me move to the grounds of performance. And these are all like introductory comments so that we can set up our conversation. Now, autobiography is an important part of the literatures around Parsi theatre. Many of the Parsi theatre dramatists wrote autobiographies. And it's interesting because one of the reasons why these autobiographies become so popular is because Parsi theatre is the first commercial theatre pan-India. And it bequeaths or puts to their actors great love and great stardom, the kind that was not possible before, because it's a stardom by a paying public. We know about stardom there. So the autobiography of a female impersonator and a star is an interesting project we thought about it. I'll come to it, but I'll just mark Parsi theatre. And it's a form that comes in 1850s and dies out around 1930, gives over to cinema. And what is important for our project was at that time to recognize that the Parsi theatre changed the sensory expectations of spectators. They expected entertainment and they got it. And the magic of the stage, what is often called the secular magic of illusionism, comes into our understanding and to our experience because the proscenium march becomes the frame within which the Parsi theatre happens. The Parsi theatre is full of spectacle and lots of stage machinery, trapdoors, flies, and storm machines, ships, all coming in from Victorian melodrama and happily embraced by the commercial theatre. So the spectator pays for the ticket and pays for the entertainment and the pleasures of theatre in a way that wasn't possible before. That's why the spectator also bestows on her beloved actors a kind of love that hasn't been shown before. It's for profit, it's a business, and it meets the expectations of its spectators across India, but also in East Asia. So that's Parsi theatre in a little capsule. So here, when I put in the meaning of an autobiography, it is in the classic sense an autobiography about the journey of a life, the specialness or the disappointments or whatever is happening to the person, and how he or she, it's primarily he, the autobiographies, how they have engaged with their theatre. Sundari's autobiography, auto and slash biography, is not a written autobiography by Sundari, by himself, but he dictated it to his son, Dinkar Bhojak. So there's a little prism there, which is an interesting shift. And the detail, of course, as I mentioned, he enters the stage when he's 9, and he achieves instant and enduring stardom at the age of 11 when he plays Sundari in Saubhagya Sundari, which is a loose adaptation of Othello. That's the show that gives him his name for the rest of his life. Now, autobiography, as I just said, we know is about a person and her or his journey. Now, when you have an autobiography of a female impersonator, you have a double exposure, because is the autobiography of the character or of the actor? When you have then a double exposure, we have a triple exposure, because the actor then is also a female impersonator. So there is a sort of relay of images here, and that is what was of interest when we were making the play. This relationship between person and persona, between acting skills and a kind of existential relationship to your role. So we have a charismatic and puzzling figure who is desired and consumed at 2 levels, as an actor, Sundari, and as a name or whatever figure of Desdemona that he takes on and carries with his life. So there is a kind of disharmony in some senses, and I quote Judith Butler here. She says, in another context, and I'm using it in the context of who is this female impersonator. She says, this could be, and I'm using that for the purposes of my argument, where sex, gender, and sexual practice may not harmonize. So the disalignments are interesting. And the disalignments, if I might put them in a little word, is from male, female, the move from boy to actor to woman, very fluid. So in that senses, it's a challenge for the pedagogy of acting and the experience of acting as to how to deal with this. So it's a series of realignments, which I would suggest is the source of the enchantment that Parsi theatre was able to produce. There are 3 levels of enchantment, if I might put it like that. One is the curtains, which we will just talk about. One is the musical tradition, which uses a wide variety of musical idioms from the traditions of the 19th century courtesans, ghazal, as well as thumri. And the major female impersonators, that's Bal Gandharv and Jayshankar Sundari, were splendid singers. And the great tradition of the Marathi Natya Sangeet comes from here. For us, when we started the production, the collaboration meant that it was multi-authored and it was also distributed authorship, by which I mean that we started work all together on the curtains, on the improvisation with actors, on the text, which was being developed as the improvisations went, and on the conceptual aspect of the design, which Nilima will talk about in a moment. And before I hand over to Nilima, I might just make a small context to the one part of the grammar of Parsi theatre that enchanted us was the curtain. The curtain in the Parsi theatre, just like the proscenium arch, changes the entire language of acting as well as of expectation of illusion. But the Parsi theatre curtain is built on the grammar of the perspectivalization as well as the vanishing point. All wings and borders are built on that. On top of the theatre is a little border which always has cloudlets. So we are always working with perspective. it becomes a fascinating and very loved aspect of Parsi theatre, these curtains, because for the first time, the actors are placed in a location. And for the first time, the audience expects location. There were 5 curtains which were popular, but Nilima will talk about it. So for us and for the conceptualization of this performance, the curtains became, via Nilima's work on the whole concept, as it were, of the curtain, both device and subject. And Nilima, if I might ask you to come in here.
First of all, thank you, Neil, for bringing us here and giving us this opportunity to rethink and talk again about the production that. But thank you, Anu, also, because this is, when I go back to thinking about what we did in this play, it marks itself as one of the most important, well, I'll use the word that Sundari uses, milestones in kind of the idea of working together and in the extension of my own work, both. So let me start with what our original decisions were when we started thinking about what to do. I mean, this is the beginning of the production. We had not many things which had been kind of stated and put out there, which we had to follow. We were starting from the beginning. So, but there was the conceptual frame of the Parsi theatre mise en scène, which was there for us to start with. We were, I think, extremely attracted to the form because of its kind of proactive relationship with the dramatization of the narrative and with the performing body. And so that was the initial attraction. It was also its belief in abundance and its belief in adornment and in the possibility, perhaps should I say, of puzzles. And that were intriguing factors and gave us an entry point into this. But as Anu has pointed out, that these were the nature of the mise en scène was a perspectival one. We had to kind of think, it was a challenge for us to rethink this and work again. Now, I should bring in at this point the fact that I had already been painting skulls, but when I was painting pardas, you could say, in my own work when I came to be part of this production. And so for me, it was a particular seduction. It is apart from the visual seduction of the Parsi theatre, but it was a seduction and a challenge both to, in some ways, work with that background. Now, but it was also a challenge now to, as Anu has very aptly put it, that to add other dimensions to it, to the painted cyc, to the front curtain, to the wings, and to any other intervention that we wanted to make. And the challenge was both to use the painted scrolls as both as subject and device, as Anu has already said. So our first decision was to create a painted backdrop, almost straight from the traditional repertoire that was available to us. A palace, a lake, silhouetted trees, a moonlit sky, but we painted it to a scale which was perhaps unusual, 25 feet by 29 feet. And it was painted by the competent hands of a sideboard painter, Satyendra. Our next intervention, however, was to pattern the lake with lotus motifs, thereby, in a way, stealing the perspectival view. Now, the lotus patterns maybe this is stretching a point a little bit, but I think it's important to bring it in at this stage. The lotus pattern came from another older tradition of painted backgrounds. The Pichwai of the Pushti Margi worship of Krishna, which follows the practice of granting darshan in a way that it sort of, it's a theatric, it's ritual, it's theater, and it's painting. Right from the streets, believers are urged to come for the darshan of the icon. And the icon is there to be revealed, but you have to take your turn. You have to follow a protocol. You're ushered in gently with a feather whisk to get the right seats. And by seats, I mean to stand there. And then the darshan, following theatric conventions, would be available to you. And you would behold the jhanki, and the icon would achieve its resplendence by the background pichwai, by other embellishments, and by the music accompanying the darshan within a temporal frame. So it seems that it was for me important to invoke these other histories of enchantment, and also by using a variety of skills of different hands, and to try and effect a transformation of this form that we so loved and responded to through another kind of reassembling, through a collaborative process. So this is where we started. Anu?
Yes. I think that the other thing that maybe you can bring in now, Nilu, is what we have on the screen, the front curtain. And yeah, and I mean, the Parsi theatre, the front curtain, we know, and perhaps you can introduce that idea and what then you conceptualized with Bhupen's work. Yeah.
Well, the front curtain in the Parsi theatre is about concealing. It is known as the signature curtain, where that is the emblem of the theatre company, and it's heavy and it's opaque. And it conceals before it reveals. Now, when we chose a diaphanous golden tissue curtain, we were changing that. We were allowing the viewer in from the start, to some extent. And then we got Bhupen Khakhar to paint upon this golden tissue curtain, be repositioned. But one thing I should point out, this is a thought that came to me, that by repositioning the curtain, the diaphanous curtain, which comes from a tradition within the Parsi theatre, or when they want to create a dreamlike sequence of the magic of some romance, they would use a convention like the net curtain. So by repositioning it in front, what were we doing? Were we actually, how were we playing with the, we were repositioning romance in a way, and which I think has certain, I mean, it's in some ways gave us the key how to go on. And now Bhupen started working on this thing, and he painted these amazing images, which he chose from the work of the from the images of the autobiography, and created narrative sequences, much like a kind of what Anu and I were calling the other day, memory paths or memory spaces. And these were sequential kind of majestic and yet very vulnerable characters that Bhupen created were all the more vulnerable and all the more majestic for the glitter that of the tissue material. But also they were vulnerable because after the opening scenes, they gave way to other dynamics of the curtain with the actors. And it was surrendering their signatorial presence in a way.
Yeah, if we can try that. Sorry for the cut, but this is one of the moving images that Madhushri and Mukul shot of the curtain as part of the performance. So that's where Nilu's whole idea of concealing and revealing comes in. Yeah. And so to the hands, Nilu, and to the craft.
Should we talk about that now? Because yes, there was for Bhupen, we have already thought about the kind of we talked about the kind of amazing extension of his skills that was required for Bhupen to create what he did on a surface which was diaphanous. And he grumbled about it, but he also enjoyed it. And the other hands that we already talked about is the hand of Satyendra, who created that marvelous backdrop and sort of invested it with such a lavish aura that I think it permeated the whole play. Then we were also, Anuradha had suggested that we have a situation in which a tableau is brought in and enacted in the scene about Nala Damayanti. And we had the idea of using the skills of Shamsul Haq, who is from Sikandrabad, I think, is a tajia maker. And he's also made very huge Ravans. So his accomplishments are phenomenal. And he made for us these two wonderful swans, which led this, this kind of tableau into the stage. And there were these very kind of magical, if somewhat preposterous, swans, which then completely played about with the balance of scales of the stage.
Here I just want to come in. This has been an old sort of interest, or in fact quite a passion of mine, with moving platforms and the meaning of tableau. Of course, moving platforms is one of the most ancient theatrical devices, starting from the Greeks. So it's about both the entry and the exit on the one hand, but it's also about the ephemeral and the material. What you put on the little platform is moving within another theater space, and it goes away. So you see it coming and you see it going. It's both the nuts and bolts of theater as well as the magic of those nuts and bolts. So this became an interest. And when Nilu talked with the making of these, what she calls quite preposterous swans, it was leading a platform in which the story of Nala Damayanti was happening. So it's a tableau which transfers or points significant meaning towards the audience, freezes the meaning, and then actually makes us look again at the grammar of the theater. And Neil, if we can just have that video, animate those hunts that we talked about. And the video that we are going to show actually talks of Sundari being enchanted by the magic of the theater. Thank you, Neil.
मैं आती तो मेरी खुशी का ठिकाना नहीं रहता था। नाटक के पर्दे पर बने जंगल, महल, पर्वत, नदी आदि के चित्र और अलग अलग पोशाकों, अलग अलग परिधानों में सज धज कर आते राजा रानी, राजकुमार, राजकुमारी मुझे सचमुच के राजा रानी लगते थे। ये स्वांग है, सच नहीं है, ऐसा मानना मेरी समझ के बाहर था। विदूषक जब रात में होने वाले नाटक की डुग्गी पीट कर ऐलान करता तो स्कूल में बैठे बैठे मुझे कुछ हो जाता। फिर पानी पीने का बहाना करके बाहर निकल आता और विदूषक के पीछे 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 पूरे गांव भर में घूमता रहता और नाटक के मंडप के सामने आकर अपना आसन जमा के बैठ जाता।
Thank you, Neil. So the play of scale and material that seemed to have been part of our thinking was also, of course, hugely a part of the tradition with which we were dialoguing, and that's Parsi theatre. One of the major aspects of the desire that Parsi theatre was able to engender was, of course, as I mentioned earlier, the other great enchantment is the female impersonator, who is interesting because we know, of course, that he becomes an icon, and every part of his body is in that sense fetishized. The way of holding, the way of twisting, the arm, the hand. And also, and there's the enigma, deeply identified with as the identification happens with stars. So he becomes a fashion setter, and so much is the desire to follow him that his favorite or his most famous dialogues are embroidered on the edge of a sari, and people can wear it on their bodies. Women would wear then his words on their bodies. So, fashion icon, as well as somebody who you can, as it were, embrace on your body, both an icon and a star who asks for identicalness from their fans. He gets gifts like ivory combs, gold buttons. So in which way you set up a dialogue is part of the making of this icon. The cycle of relationships that this puts forward was of interest to us in the playmaking process, is that Sundari, and that came in the first trailer, Sundari makes himself over perhaps images that he sees and creates a persona, and the women then model themselves on him, but he also models himself on women. And that's a very interesting sort of realignment of acting vocabulary. He's watching women and learning from his gestures. And I just bring a small thought here. In the autobiography, when he comes onto stage, somebody of a family whose daughter he was friends with, and they thought of themselves as siblings, the family says, "Oh, this is not Sundari, this is Gulab." In other words, he has taken actions and built a figure which he thinks is realistic, quote unquote. I mean, but that's another discussion and we could go on. But in terms of the play process, for us, we had to find ways of showing that the Sundari figure is an assemblage. It is about many aspects put together, sometimes aligned and sometimes not aligned. In the production, the process was always about layering that and unlayering, if there's such a word. And in that sense, we were always bringing in the fact that costume and vestment and visage is what changes, and that makes the practice of gender. So constantly we were working with people wearing saris, undressing, wearing work pajamas, working with each other, using makeup. So what happens in the wings, as it were, of the stage, we brought center stage, and that was very much a part of the grammar of the production. I'm sort of leading in the direction of these two thoughts about layering, of wearing a sari and of taking it out, of buttoning and unbuttoning blouses. But this interest comes also, or it has an alignment or is a parallel interest from the autobiography of Sundari, where he has a wonderful section which we made into a soliloquy, in which he says how he transforms and what is the meaning of that transformation. And that is interesting because he seems to put the entire magical notion of transformation on costume. And that is an interesting part about actors. And we know there's a huge tradition of costume actually being worn 4 hours before, 3 hours before, to alter processes of being and seeing on stage. And we know that, sequences, a sequence on faces in something like the Ram Leela changes the visage. So here, we'd like to show you a speech that is almost word to word from Sundari in his autobiography, in which he discusses the process of transformation. But here, I'd like to just point to the fact that the actor does a particular addition. This is Jitu Shastri, and he does an addition about which I will talk after we see the video.
जब जयशंकर ने पहले पहल चोली, ब्लाउज, लहंगा अपने शरीर पे पहना, मुझे ऐसा लगा कि एक पुरुष एक सुंदर स्त्री में रूपांतरित हो रहा है।
कितना अच्छा लगता है जब तुम सहेलियों के संग गीत गाते हो। अगर मुझे नाटक करने की छूट होती तो मैं और तुम सहेलियां बनते, हाथों में हाथ डाले समुद्र के किनारे खूब दौड़ते।
मैंने अपने अंदर एक सुंदर सी नवयौवना को प्रकट होते हुए देखा, जिसमें सुघड़ मदभरा यौवन झलक रहा है, जिसकी छवि में स्त्री का लावण्य महक रहा है, आंखों में सहज भाव, चाल में गुजरात का गौरव, जो कि पुरुष नहीं स्त्री है।
मेरा पूरा शरीर बज रहा है।
मेरी उंगलियां क्या सिर्फ तुम्हारे बालों को छू रही है?
इस तरह कि मालूम नहीं कहां तुम खत्म होती हो, कहां मैं शुरू।
इस तरह कि तुम मैं हो गए हो और मैं तुम। पर तुम तो औरत बनते हो, औरत का मन नहीं समझ सकते।
स्त्री बनते हुए थोड़ा संकोच जरूर हुआ, पर अब लग रहा है कि मैं मैं स्त्री ही हूँ।
Thank you, Neil. I just want to take your attention to the improvisation that Jitu Shastri did with these diyas. That was his addition. In terms of what he felt, all the difficulties and dangers of finding a vocabulary, of being a woman, when actually he was doing the opposite. He was disrobing. He was showing a manly chest. He was lying flat on the ground as if he were a man, but saying the opposite. I feel I am a woman. And that is actually the puzzle, the enigma, the difficulties of actually having to make a character today that is citing a grammar of performance earlier. So Jitu Shastri finds the diya a way of dealing with the risk, because I know that diya became hot on his chest and he had to deal with it exactly. Also hold his breath so that he didn't direct the breath in a way that he didn't blow it off. So all kinds of difficulties in performance become important. And I think here brings me to something that has been, I think, as all of us as collaborators in this project were interested in the notion of working on a production that talked about the theater, that talked about the stage, the nuts and bolts of technique, the nuts and bolts of how magic is made, how frail and actually how vulnerable is it that the painter, on the one hand, it's the painting, it's the costume, it's the craft, it happens and it's citing a particular language of commercial theater that actually only in that sense has a long life because it can produce enchantment. Gas lights, traveling boxes, again, costume. So very much the interest in this production was about the nuts and bolts of theater that can produce a certain kind of transformation. So in that sense, Sundari was a narrative about the theater. And that was where I think our dialogue all the way through was a dialogue about device and about technique and about fabrication of both stage and character. So this actually brings me to almost the last section about our conversation, about citations, about theater, and about making, and of working with ideas that actually go on before a production happens. That's where we then bring it into the production. And let me then bring you to a video of the construction of the icon by gaslights, by lights, by story, by narrative, all that accrues to the theater and to the performers within the theater. If we have that video, Neil, of the close-up of Harish. Yeah.
सब कुछ हो सकता है। अचानक धरती फटी, सीता जी उसमें समा गई, अग्निबाण चल रहे हैं, बरखा आ गई सचमुच की आंख बुझाने को, उधर आसमान में चमत्कारी घोड़ा उड़ा सरपट, इधर धरती पे लाशें बिछ गई। देख रहा हूं घोर नाटकी पलों से भरा ड्रामा। और गैस बत्तियों से स्टेज उजागर है। किसे देख रहे हैं वो नटी कौन है जिसकी गोद में योद्धा का सिर है, इसके काले घुंघराले बाल बादल से लहरा रहे हैं, इसकी गोल गोल बाहें नरमी से योद्धा के गले में पड़ी है। अभी वो नीचे देख रही है, अभी वो ऊपर देखेगी तो उसकी तिरछी चितवन सबका मन मोह लेगी। कौन है ये जादूगर? मैं ही, इसे संसार सुंदरी कहेगा, इसे संसार सुंदरी कहेगा।
Thank you, Neil. And perhaps Nilima with that scroll.
Before I talk about that scroll, which is in a way a re-rendering of one of the images of Sundari in his autobiography. I think I'd go back to nuts and bolts, as Anu says, and talk about how we came to work on the wings. Now, since we were not working with a perspectival framing, they came to me as some kind of vertical margins, maybe say additive spaces, where the performance could extend itself rather than being hemmed in. And I think perhaps it was my admiration for what might seem quite disconnected in this context, but my admiration for the way in certain manuscript painting, the borders of the painting extend and become like alternative spaces for extending the theme. Now, what were these additive spaces doing? There were spaces for tangential ideas. There were also spaces for asides. And I think that these would come alive to me. They were emblematic images, not descriptive. And they would come alive. The intention was to have them come alive with interactions with the performing body. I think at this stage, and also since I go back to the image that we ended with, which was the recreation of an image of Sundari, at some stage we sort of felt the need for a direct citation of our the times and the conventions that inspired us. Now, I think we need here to talk about Raja Ravi Verma, who was a painter perhaps some 50 years before, preceding Jayshankar Sundari, but whose paintings, attained popularity, perhaps in a sense, first time that kind of commercial popularity, because he couldn't meet the demand of his paintings reaching the patrons that wanted them. So he started actually printing. He started what is called he started a printing, I'm forgetting now what the name of the printing press was, but it was a pan-Indian movement. Some would arguably say that it was the first national pan-Indian modern art movement that made this availability of this art to every middle-class home in some sense. And surely Sundari must have been aware of this tradition, and it's quite likely that he modeled his own repertoire following the cues given by Raja Ravi Verma. So for that reason, we felt it necessary to have enlarged re-rendering of one of Raja Ravi Verma's very enigmatic paintings about Menaka and her daughter Shakuntala. This is quite an unusual painting of an unusual story of the Apsara Menaka taking her daughter up to the heavens, Shakuntala. Now, there is an enigma in this painting, which I think is partly because of it is another kind of bonding that is happening, not the kind of bonding that one normally associates with mother and daughter and things like that. This is another kind of bonding. There is an androgynous element in the way that the figure of Menaka has been created. another kind of looking at beauty. And these were the kind of enigmas that fed into an understanding of what the possibilities of other kinds of female bonding could be. Anu, would you like to talk more about that?
I'll take on from here. I mean, in a sense, these images and these scrolls were able to provide for us, while working on acting, ways of holding, ways of embracing. And you might have seen in an earlier video the nature of the embrace between a tall female impersonator and a small woman. Now, of course, the women were not coming on stage except on bit parts towards the end of the Parsi theatre. And this kind of disalignment would not have been seen. But the fact of the female impersonator being a tall man, and this kind of, again, as I use the word again, disalignment of vision happens, but also what Nilima has suggested, which became very important, a kind of distribution of various kinds of relationships and friendships that might happen on the stage. I'll come to the friendship. Before that, I want to just take on a word that Nilima has given, which has produced a lot of thinking and very interesting aspects to the performance when we were making it, is the word aside. Like, I think, all our fascination with the nuts and bolts of theatre, we've also been fascinated by the various traditions of speech and address in the theatre. Now, there is the soliloquy we know, there's a monologue we know, but there's this enigmatic form called the aside, which is, of course, you're talking straight, but you're thinking sideways. You're also saying, why doesn't she look at me? Why is this happening? And in a play, Umrao, which we had done and which Nilima and I had again collaborated, there was a whole sequence in which the aside was principal and the speech to the main actor was secondary. So the aside also provides the actor an ability to speak in different registers. Is this aside a whisper? Is this aside in the head? Is this aside to somebody who's speaking? So when Nilima makes an image of various asides, then there are narratives that are able to give the actor an opportunity to perform within them. Once again, back to talking about the theatre as being the principal narrative in this making. And I come here now towards the end of our conversation here to showing you a video that is entirely about the way, in that sense, the exits and entries into the wings of the theatre. What are the wings, as we know? And here we come to the next. Thanks, Neil. Thank you, Neil. So once again, bringing what is behind stage, center stage, showing the assemblage, showing the camaraderie, showing also the friendships. And there I hark back to what Nilima said, the different kinds of relationships and friendships that happen, that are shown in the images, but also that happen in the actual making of the theater. Green room camaraderie is a big story and has many, many layers in every theater kind of narrative. So then we come to the very end, and I want to take you to a small bit from Madhu's film, which is about actually the coming down of the theater and what happens when things come down. She ends with completely coming down, and we are introduced to Sundari, and I will gloss it after we see it.
प्रकाश का है गोल घेरा, इसमें हम नाच रहे हैं, घूम घूम के चक्कर लगा रहे हैं कि आना
Thank you, Neil. Madhushri ends her film, one segment of the film, with these postcards. We ended our play with this, as it were, this desire that is transacted between the audience and the actor. His Ana, Phir is to the audience saying, come again, come again. And he calls for the audience. And the very reason of his being there is about the audience wanting him to be there. So this is a layer that is constant within the theater. We ended with him going back and sitting down on a chair, and a silver curtain dropped behind him, which obviously was conceptualized by making a sideways citation of the silver screen, which is the form, as it were, that took over the Parsi theater in the 1930s. So a cross-referencing, an interrelationship of texts and of forms is what the play ended with. And I will then end this talk about the fact that we were, as a collaborating sort of group, constantly talking about the making of theater while we made the theater. And the last set of images from Madhushri's film, I hope can bring that out towards you. Here again, it's about the making, the dropping, the exiting, and then all the nuts and bolts that produce that magic, as it were, being shut in for the night. Thanks, Renu.
Oh,
Thank you, Neil. That's the end of our images and our sort of remembered conversations. And I would, I think Neelu and I are here for any thoughts that you want to share with us. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anuradha and Nilima, for such an invigorating conversation. I think this entire session has made us all think not just about the various art forms that have come together on stage, but also about the different formats, the different politics that we all sort of impersonate in our own lives as well, and also about the relation between the actor and the spectator. And I think all that has beautifully amalgamated and sort of made all of us question how art forms are interpreted by all of us. I would like to go to the first question that we have with us today. So our first question is, how does a performance such as of Sundari help us to reconceptualize politics through the intimate and the bodily lens? And both of you can please answer. Anyone can go first. We'd like to hear from both of you.
Just read that again, please. Just say that out again.
Yeah. How does a performance such as Sundari help us to reconceptualize our politics through the intimate and bodily lens? I think this is also how we often look at politics through larger implications, I think, is hinting towards how do we view it from an intimate lens?
If I might start, and then I'll hand over to Nilima. Yeah, I would say that here, I'm not sure whether it's a way that we can reconfigure, but I think what we can do is see the various alignments, right? Alignments of how you want to present yourself or how you are in a public space and how that connects up. I mean, I'd give you a small example that has been with me for the rest of, the whole of my life as a person who teaches acting, is that when young actors first come into a, let's say, institutional frame, they have a different body. They are working with what they bring about masculinity and femininity. In between, things change. And by the time you finish with, let's say, training in an institute, let's say National School of Drama, or any institute which constantly asks you to rethink the relationship of your body with object, with atmosphere, with the body in itself, in a public space, in an intimate way, changes. So I think that there may not be one way by which Sundari as a text may look at the alterations or self-representations that we might want to project or to behave or to act with. But it might actually bring out the fissures of that. I mean, the breaks and the ruptures of the fact that there is nothing continuous in terms of having a gender identity. In fact, it is completely fluid, or it is completely assembled. And I think that that might be perhaps a way of looking into it. Maybe, I mean, it may not provide us with some kind of more solid frame within which to look at a political act. But if one looks at presenting oneself as woman and as man in any space, being, I mean, both an ideological and a philosophical concept, then I think it may show up the fissures and the ruptures within that. I'm not sure this answers the question, but I mean, is there anything, Nilima, you might want to?
I think what you said was very well said. So
Great. So I'll go to my next question. Must all feminist art be politically charged, or can personal expressions devoid of any larger implication become a part of feminist art? And again, any one of you can go first.
I pass it to Nilima this time.
Well, this is a well-known kind of thing that we all start with when we question ourselves about whether our work has any kind of feminist agency or not. It's the well-known idea about the personal being political is, of course, built into this. But I think apart from that, I mean, I think that the whole feminist movement has created a special space for the actual, say again, I'm using the word realignment of the personal. It is made available certain grammars, perhaps, through which this is possible. So I think that that role, when you have, you have the grammar, then you begin to speak, and that itself is the starting point.
Anuradha, would you like to add?
No, I just want to add one thing, and which is, I mean, I think Nilima has already said it. I think that, again, grammar development is a process, and you don't come to the end of it in some sort of one production will produce a particular grammar. One production might give us a sense of what it was wanting to deal with. And I mean, as I said, mentioned at the very early part of the talk, that in the 1990s saw lots of work on female impersonation. It was not producing a grammar of how to be a woman, but it was producing a grammar of how to deal with making a woman on stage. And that, I suppose, is some manner of looking at syntax or whatever, so that we are, asking a question, right, rather than presenting a solution, or even something which is kind of an end to that dialogue. I think that is where perhaps this whole question of producing a particular kind of art, it's a lens, I think. It's a kind of philosophical lens, perhaps, and that produces different refractions at different times.
On that note, we also have another question that is related to this process of crafting a woman. And somebody wants to know that how do you craft this image of a woman? And perhaps you could both bring your perspectives from visual art and from theater direction, specifically maybe in the Sundari production.
That's difficult.
After you, Neelu.
No, you go on.
Well, this is kind of a journey, as it were, in the dark. But let me bring to you, which I've already done, that there were certain exercises or improvisations that we developed. And these improvisations were all about crafting. As I said, there was a huge, many days of work on actors in the makeup room, many days, which Gitanjali Shri saw and then produced a text. Now, what is the makeup room? It is actually building a woman, as it were. So one of the things that was looking at is that, when you put the lipstick, is it about sensuality or is it about work? And I think it's about work. And once the actors begin to think about what they're doing as work, and not as per se about seduction or womanhood. It's about work. And just as we might actually decide to construct ourselves in different ways and by different models. And we model, as it were, our own understanding. These exercises were about modeling. And there were months and months of working with the sari, in which the actor was supposed to then, the man was supposed to then be as familiar with the sari as any woman's daily routine. Again, it was not about exoticization of the sari, but of being comfortable in wearing it. So I presume that these processes were about dismantling auras to find ways of recreating our understanding of why this kind of figure is interesting. But all the improvisations were about assembly, how to do it. And there were sections in which you saw an image where he's standing on one side of a cupboard and a woman on the other side of the cupboard, and the cupboard has a moon, in which he's asking, and that's straight from the autobiography, how to tie a sari. And he's asking also, what kind of sari? So his friend tells her, I wear this, this is when I wear what. So even that is a fabrication. And she's doing it for reasons of wherever she is or what her understanding of her position in a social structure is. He's doing it because he's wanting to assemble a figure. And I think the entire process of rehearsal over 3 months was various levels of assembling and, as I had said earlier, disassembling, so that we are able to look at the making of this figure as process, not as product, as it were.
Nilima, would you like to add?
I don't think there's very much more that I would like to say, except that the same kind of principles apply to preparation for visual, element in theatre. I mean, the same kind of using the improvisatory skills to be able to get to any kind of relationship with what's happening within the play. More or less, developed on the spot. I mean, like I've talked to you about different kind of traditions that might have influenced me, or which were at the back of my mind when I was, but they were at the back of my mind. The actual working out, the improvising had to be done right there. I didn't come with the thing that I'm going to use an element of the hashya within the painting. It was devised as one goes along, and this is a process that makes it possible.
And I think this brings me to the last question, which also talks deeply about the collaboration that this particular piece is, since it brings together different art forms, both the visual art and the theater piece. So how has the sort of pandemic sort of changed this interaction of the artist's body with the audience, the intimate and the public, and especially now with virtual platforms? So how do you think this interaction has sort of shifted?
Well, it's profoundly shifted, right? And it's, the kind of theater we've been used to is a theater in which you breathe in the same room and you are there and you touch, and all of which is now not possible. So one has to find other languages. And also, it's not necessary that the other language will be a parallel. So collaboratory ventures apart, the grammar we knew of performance is also destabilized in some senses. So I'm not necessarily romanticizing the fact that breathing in the same room and working with people in close proximity. I mean, that's one part of the nuts and bolts of theater. But when we are working or thinking after the pandemic, we have to start again. And I don't think that it's about like saying it's an automatic way of finding, that we will find by on virtual platforms a language. But what we will find is that we need a different language. There are no equivalents, I think, here. And I think that that is both extremely challenging and also extremely frightening, because you have to reorganize in the way that you think of audience relationships. And I mean, Parsi theatre is all about desire between the two. Where is this, how do you talk about this transaction? I mean, as we know that theatre makes both affiliations, disaffiliations, affinities, non-affinities. You identify, you disidentify in a space. And it's all, I mean, there is a word that great, person who writes on theatre, and Erika Fischer-Lickster, she says it's a sort of contagion in the auditorium. You get the laugh and you get the whatever. So that's a contagion we've lost to another kind. I mean, I'm not sure it's a very easy transit.
Nilima, if you'd like to add.
I see myself, even within my studio, the collaborative processes that I use now limited, but it's nothing like what is for theatre. It is I mean, we are that way as painters. We are perhaps in a slightly privileged position as far as comparing us with other kind of with the performance artists.
So I think we have time for one or two more questions, because there are a couple of questions that are coming in. So somebody wants to know, how does one see the disharmony of sex, sexual practice, and gender with the arrival of the actress and the female impersonator coexisting in the Parsi theatre?
I won't be able to give you precise dates, but there is there's a long time before the woman takes over the the female impersonator. Earlier on, it starts from small roles and walk-ons, and then you move to the woman doing a kind of the major role, and the female impersonator is taken to the margins. A very fine essay on that is by Catherine Hanson. So I think the coexistence of two principal characters doesn't exist. I think there is a move outwards of the female impersonator and the move inwards of the woman playing the role. And I think that if we put them on the stage together, that's a kind of fantastical position. It's a woman talking about, if I were allowed to be on stage, I would do this. And so the two figures actually, and again, as I'm saying, I can't immediately recall the dates, but the two figures don't come on stage together. And you can see that visually. It would be difficult.
Our last question for the evening is that if you were to revisit this piece now in the contemporary gender discourse, what would be different? And perhaps both of you can give your perspectives from your art forms.
I don't know how one can. I mean, the revisitation would have to be about, first of all, revisiting plays is a very, very difficult, almost precarious thing, because it's made at a particular time, and when it's redone, revivals of plays after many years, this would be 20 almost, are very difficult because you don't know the atmosphere anymore. So that's why, I mean, in some senses, in the history of theatre, revivals are bound to collapse.
Is that so?
That is that's all. I mean, I'm being a bit dramatic, but they're not necessarily, they don't work on the same tenor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because they have been made in a particular condition of performance. So we have, within our own modern Indian history, when you have a revival in the 90s of earlier plays, they just don't seem the same. So it's also because the audience has changed. It's also because our own view of that has changed. So instead of actually changing it for a time, then maybe one has to think of it as another installment or a sequel or a prequel, I don't know, so that you put it together in a different way. If you put it in the same way and think that you can actually make it work for today, could be difficult. And this particularly difficult, because I think this is in any case worked on notions of memory and reconstruction. So then this is a reconstruction, and I'm not sure that could be something that could lead to a fruitful project, is my thought. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't know how.
What about, would you think that particularly this play, or would you think differently about other plays or other productions?
I think that productions that are more than a decade old really need rethinking. But also I would say that when a production, even if it is, let's say, being revived after 2 years, is actually another make. You know, the actors do different things.
They do different.
And they must do different things because their motivations and their intentions, these are all kind of naturalistic dialogue, naturalistic performance things, and I'm putting them in quotes. But they have to rework the material. You know, there is a tradition that people see a video and go on to stage, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship that they had actually found with an object will be recreated. So anyway, recreations on theater are actually, revivals in theaters to work are recreations.
Nilima, would you like to add from a visual art perspective?
This is something that we have a very different kind of problems in visual art. So that doesn't really connect with this because, I mean, there are traditions within, say, for instance, Chinese art, when copying an artwork was considered making it an original. Even so, they're very different kind of trajectories in that work. And I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I love the idea that I can do, that a work I do is not yet complete, that I can do a version of it. I mean, this kind of thing is very, in a way, crucial to my way of working. So it's very different.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that lovely, lovely event, lovely session, lovely conversations. And I think our audiences really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Yash, for curating the questions for us. Thank you so much, Anuradha Kapur, Nilima Sheikh, for sparing this time for us, giving us a lovely, lovely evening. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining tonight.